All right. Maggie, can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
This morning to our winter 2018 webinar entitled Altered State, Best Practices in a Substance-Free Workplace. Couple housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar is being recorded, and following the webinar, give us a little bit of tech time, but then we get the webinar posted as well as the handouts, which are already attached to the webinar that you can access today. We will put all that onto the members only section of the website. If you do not have an access code or a user ID password, let us know, and we'll help you get set up with that. There will also be a survey following the webinar that you will get. We'd appreciate your feedback. We have put, I believe, we're going to be putting everybody on mute if we haven't already, just to avoid the background noise, because we know everybody, is working, and there's sometimes often some background noise that gets picked up by the system. There is a raise your hands feature if you've been on these before, and Maggie and I will be keeping an eye out for that. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter today. She should not be a stranger to those of you who have been on our webinars before and been to convention and regional meetings. It's Grace Kelly. Grace is a human resource risk management consultant with RC Kelly Law. In addition to her HR expertise, Grace has worked extensively in the healthcare arena before joining the firm. She was on the board and continues to work with the Center for Humanistic Change in Bethlehem, PA. The CHC, as it's called, is a private not-for-profit agency providing prevention education for alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, as well as life skills training for children and adults. Her combined medical, legal, and human resource knowledge makes her a great resource for drug and alcohol fitness for duty policy, procedure, and issue resolution. She spends much of her day helping out contractors across the state. So without any other hesitation and delay, I'm going to introduce Grace Kelly. Grace, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mike, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to do a quick test of the hand raising function. So if everybody has found that function, if you could raise your hand, we're going to make sure that all of that works. And because we want this to be very interactive, so if you have a question along the way as I'm going through the slides, please interrupt me at that time rather than waiting till the end. I find that becomes more helpful to have that conversation while we're on that topic. So I think we're good. So Maggie's going to put all of your hands down. Okay. So, as Mike said, this actually is a presentation that we gave at the 2017 Pennsylvania School Bus Annual Conference. We're repeating it here. The handouts are in your packet. I'm getting feedback, Mike. I don't know if you're hearing that.
I'm not, but I'll tell you what.
Okay.
I'm going to put mine on mute. Let's see if that helps.
Okay.
I'm using a headset.
No worries. So the handouts are there. I will reference them at times, but again, that's another good place of information once we're done and you're kind of relooking through your notes. Okay, with that being said, I am the world's worst at timekeeping, but I promise to get you offline before 11 o'clock. So I'm going to talk fast. So today's agenda, we are just going to review what currently is going on. The relevant laws and regulations surrounding drug testing and a substance-free workplace, and a couple of policies and procedures that you should have in place. And then, of course, I always have stories to share. So we'll go through a couple events. Again, encouraging sharing, ask questions. For yourself, ask your friends question. You don't have to say who it was or what happened, but you're asking your question for your friend. We're happy to entertain those. And I think, again, it's very helpful to have real life examples as we're going through this process. Okay, official disclaimer. Although I work for a law firm, I am not a lawyer. I am an HR subject matter expert, and I do work with a bunch of lawyers, so if I ever need to phone a friend, I have a bunch that I can rely on, but I myself am not a lawyer, so the information we're not providing you is legal advice at this time. I also have never inhaled, so I am telling you this information based on the information that I've heard from others. Okay, so just a little bit of background, 67% of illicit drug users and 74% of binge drinkers are actually gainfully employed. They may be part of your workforce today. Others within your workforce know somebody who is using or drinking while at work. So again, as we go through this process, we want to make sure many of you have safety committees. We want to make sure that you have empowered your employees to speak up if they think something is unsafe or they feel someone needs help. We have a huge problem in the state of Pennsylvania and across the United States in regards to the misuse of prescription drugs. When we go through this process, which is very alarming, and Mike had mentioned the Center for Humanistic Change, which deals a lot in the state of Pennsylvania in regards to education and drug avoidance. So if you have an opportunity to look them up, they've got some great programs. They actually do a mock teen bedroom, which allows parents, like part of a PTA program, parents can go in and try and find where kids may be hiding things. So it's actually a really great program. It's just one of the things that they do. But if you look at this, dramatic change over even the last 10 years, this is truly an epidemic, and we need to be mindful of what's going on with our families, with our children, and certainly with our workforce. One of the, again, total sidebar, just as I'm setting the stage here, beyond the Center for Humanistic Change, there are other places to go for help. And sometimes just the more we talk about it, the more others know that there is place for help. There's another great resource. It's called the Crisis Text Line. This is actually a nonprofit 24/7 counseling helpline, if you would. And in this day and age where, again, the generations that are coming, after me, of course, are very text heavy, and they might not want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody like we used to do. You'd call into a helpline. This is actually just a text support line. And when you text this number, you get a certified counselor on the other end that will talk to you via text. And there's actually a great TED Talk about this where they go through some of the scenarios where they have saved lives. So if you go to crisistextline.org, which is right down here is a little thing, they have a multitude of collateral pieces that you can look through. If your school doesn't know about this, please engage in them with that conversation. They've got lots of tools for schools. Okay, moving on, back to the workplace. Again, this is an issue that we need to worry about. You are in a very highly regulated and controlled work industry, which is great, but if you look here at transportation and warehousing, we still have about 8%, 9% of our workplace that is impacted by either substance, drugs, alcohol use while at work. There you are. 1 in 5 workplace injuries or near misses is due to a prescription drug misuse. So again, we talk a lot about alcohol and drug use, but I think we need to have major conversations with our workforce about when they are prescribed drugs, how do they use them, when is it okay to use them, especially with our driving team, when, if they need to have these conversations with their doctors. I am a commercial driver. I'm a professional driver. Can I use this while I'm at work? Should I take certain precautions? Should I not have this? Is there some other alternative? Because again, they may have, legally a prescription to use that, but we're misusing those drugs. And of course, we now have the conversation about marijuana. 26 states have legalized marijuana. And 8 of those states have legalized recreational use of pot. So again, this is becoming mainstream. We need to have these conversations with our drivers. State of Pennsylvania back in 2014 legalized medical marijuana. Now we're in 2018. I take that back. I think it was 2016. 2018, we're starting to see the actual distribution. So it took them a little while to get all their processes in place and all the regulations in place, but we are starting to see doctors now having the ability to prescribe or recommend medical marijuana. So we need to make sure that we're having that conversation with our drivers as well. I have another slide on that, but I'll go ahead and say it here because I'll say it twice. FMCSA still considers marijuana a level 1 substance. So you cannot use medical marijuana, even if you have a prescription for it, and be a commercial driver and pass a drug test. So best practices in a drug-free workplace. Again, I do this conversation in a multitude of industries. In your industry, you already know this. You have lived this for years under FMCSA. But we want to make sure that as you are implementing this, you are making sure that you are incorporating your industry-specific requirements, but also the things that are unique to your operation. We assume that everybody knows, right? But we need to make sure that we're doing continuing education, program promotion, making sure, we're putting these things out there. In your packet, I have included a sample memo that talks about medical marijuana and the fact that you should not be using that if you are a commercial driver. So again, we've provided that to you, that you can go ahead and use that and post that and make sure everybody is aware. Obviously, under FMCSA, you already have drug testing. We're going to talk a little bit about your DOT drug testing and your non-DOT drug testing as we go along. So we talk about education for our employees. Again, it's not enough to just have it in your handbook or put a poster up, but we need to be having these conversations with our employees, whether it's during a safety meeting or your back to school meetings, things like that. We are going to talk a little bit about supervisor training under the suspicion testing portion of the requirement under FMCSA. And then depending on your healthcare providers, some of you may have an EAP program that may be available to your employees. And again, if you have that, making sure that your employees know about that and that they know how to access that plan. Apparently I talk about those things again. Your policy should include, let's talk about that a little bit. And again, in your handouts, we've provided some sample handbook policies. And again, I recognize several of the folks that are logged on here. So I know many of you have heard my handbook soapbox before, but again, we highly encourage people to have good documentation. And part of that is having a handbook that outlines these processes and these expectations. In addition to that, you would have your more detailed drug and alcohol policy that's going to go over who is covered. Obviously you're doing your DOT requirement, but are you also testing non-DOTs? I run into some operations where I'm testing my CDL drivers, but they are not testing their van drivers. And I have concerns because of defense issues when it comes to, God forbid, you have a van driver who is impaired and they're not part of the drug program. And you get the question, well, why is the children on the van any less important than the children on the big yellow bus? So again, we can talk about that offline if anybody has questions or concerns about that. And in the non-DOT pool would also be our aides who are charged with caring for children, especially many of our aides are caring for special needs children, and their need to be acutely aware of their surroundings and what's going on is very important during their working hours. Which leads me into the conversation about working and non-working hours. And we'll talk a little bit about this in regards to social media I always get the question when I'm in front of a group of drivers that, well, I can do whatever I want on my own time. Yes and no, because obviously they cannot report to work impaired. So even if you are engaging in a, 24-hour binge from Saturday to Sunday, you may still possibly be impaired come Monday morning. So again, their non-working hours we do care about those, and we do require them to maintain certain professionalisms during their non-working hours. Everyone is aware, I'm hoping, of the Act 24 requirement. That is, if an employee has an interaction with the police, whether they are charged or convicted, that may fall under the enumerated charges in Act 24. So again, reiterating that with employees frequently, posting the Act 24, the PDE 6004 form, and the enumerated charges on a bulletin board somewhere at work is also a great idea. Having a policy where you have the right to search. Again, you are private companies. You have control over your parking lots and your facilities, and you should put your employees on notice that you have the right to search whatever they bring on property. So again, but you have to put them on notice of those things. We've provided a policy on that as well. Drug testing procedures, again, I think that's pretty straightforward. I think everybody has that down well. Many of contractors are using third-party administrators to help with their drug testing requirements. So that actual testing procedures, the collection of samples and specimens, that's actually done by your third-party administrators. You would just want to have on hand, in case, God forbid, you were ever audited by the FMCSA, what their policies and procedures are. If you don't have it on hand, should the auditor walk through, you would just want to make sure that you could quickly obtain that from your third-party administrator. The next bullet point on here talks about zero tolerance. Again, we are in the school bus industry. I'd say 9 times out of 10, I see, and we are supporting a zero tolerance policy, meaning there's no coming back from a positive drug test in the school bus operation. In your packet, we actually included the most recent edition of the legal focus articles, where Rich talks about 2 different cases that went through the Pennsylvania courts this past year in regards to positive drug tests and the zero tolerance rule. In regards to where I have this little, for all in the parentheses, it may depend. If you're saying zero tolerance for your drivers and, those that are caring for children, but maybe you're not saying zero tolerance for your office staff because maybe they are not in a safety sensitive program. I did have a situation a couple years ago now where a member of the office team was having major difficulties at home, a lot's going on. She also ended up with dental issues and pain, had gone to the dentist, had gotten prescription medicine for the pain. It wasn't doing everything she wanted it to do. She was still in a lot of pain. And then she decided to supplement with a little extra drink and actually showed up to work completely intoxicated. So this is a position where, she's one of the folks in the office. She's not behind the wheel. She was a long-term employee who was just going through a tough time. And unfortunately had made some bad choices. At the end of the day, they did not, even though she flat out came to work intoxicated, they did not terminate her. They worked with her. They got her help. They gave her, she went on a personal leave of absence, and then she was able to return to work. So again, you just need to kind of make sure that if you are addressing a zero tolerance, who is that for and in what situation? The other piece of all this is obviously confidentiality. Those that are involved with your drug testing program, you need to make sure that they are aware of what their responsibilities are in regards to who they can share information with and who they cannot share information with. I'm going to pause for a minute and make sure we don't have any questions. And click through these. Okay. Seeing no hands, I'm going to continue on. Again, my school bus friends already know the benefits of a substance-free workplace. But again, just as a quick reminder, obviously you want to be in compliance with what is required. There is certainly a huge cost savings to have a healthy substance-free workforce. Making sure that and I do think we have one friend on here from the insurance world who can probably attest or jump in and say something about ensuring reduced liability, that you have a compliant program, that you are educating your staff about these things, and that you are keeping both your customers and your employees safe. Employee productivity, obviously, a focused group is more productive. And again, just in general, recruitment and retention, if you are committing to a healthy work environment, employees are more likely to come work for you and or stay working for you. The first thing on this slide was compliance. So we're going to go through a couple of laws that are relevant to this discussion. Everybody, I'm sure, is very familiar with FMCSA and the requirements there. We'll go through those a little bit. OSHA, there's actually one of the main tenets in the OSHA law is that you're providing a safe and healthy work environment free from harm, and obviously having coworkers who are under the influence who could cause accidents and issues or hurt others certainly would go against OSHA. Here in Pennsylvania, we have the Drug-Free Workplace Act. The Americans with Disability Act often comes into play when I'm dealing with a workplace drug issue, because sometimes things start out because of pain or chronic conditions, and which are protected under the ADA. So we need to be mindful of that. Of course, there's the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Act, the Family Medical Leave Act for those of you that are large enough with 50 or more employees within 75 miles that need to be concerned about FMLA and the interplay of FMLA. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we now have the Pennsylvania Medical Marijuana Law. So there are two, I'm going to keep going unless there's questions. Under DOT testing, you fall under and potentially depending on what kind of operations you're running, the federal motor carrier obviously is for our commercial drivers and our mechanics who are working equipment and maintenance. So those are the two pieces that we need to be mindful of. We all know, hopefully, if I was in a classroom, I'd make you shout all these out. We have certain requirements. I'm going to let these all slide in. Let me go back a slide. Sorry about that. Our requirements under FMCSA is that we do pre-employment drug testing. I'm just here to remind you that your pre-employment drug testing has a 30-day shelf life. Sometimes we cannot get our applicants through the process in 30 days because they come to us. We may use drug testing as a threshold piece for coming into class. And then we sit in class, and then we do our in-bus training, and then we get a permit, and then maybe we take the test. And if you can do this in 30 days, I need to talk to you because you're awesome. But oftentimes, again, we just need to be mindful. If you truly are using a pre-employment drug test as a validity test to sit in class, into school bus class, you might want to just watch your 30-day shelf life rule. Previous employer look back, everybody is aware of that requirement. If you have an employee who's coming to you who is already a commercial driver and has been a part of a drug testing pool in the past, You are required to reach back to those previous employers and make sure that that employee has not jumped a test or has had a positive. Conversely, you are required to respond if asked about an employee who has left your group and has gone elsewhere. Employee notice, we gave you a sample of that. Again, they, FMCSA, if they come to audit you, they are not looking for just a couple one-liners in your handbook. They want this to be a standalone document that alerts the employees that you have a drug and alcohol policy and that they are consenting to be drug tested. And we did give you a sample of that in the packet. Random processes and procedures. I know you guys are doing this. You can probably do it in your sleep. But if you do have any questions about the random process and procedure, that is frankly the bulk of what you are doing on a yearly basis. So if and when you are audited, that is what they're looking at. Do you have a copy of your active list that you sent out? Is making sure that that active list is DOT, making sure that you have good separation of your DOT and your non-DOT testing. We had an incident 2 years ago or last year. The employer was one person off their required percentage. And what had happened was they had put a non-DOT person on the DOT list. So you just want to be really careful and kind of watching those things. Post-accident DOT and non-DOT, I think I have a slide coming up about that, so I'll move on from there. And the reasonable suspicion piece, again, is just making sure that you are in compliance with how you were pulling people for reasonable suspicion, and that those that have the authority to pull people for reasonable suspicion have been trained and are certified accordingly. The employee notice, again, what FMCSA requires is, and again, your complete drug and alcohol policy, the long, probably 10-page policy comes from your third-party administrator. You could have and you should have a separate policy and a signature that's required, which is the sample we provided you, and of course, a reference within your handbook for those two documents. We also talk about how this incorporates fitness for duty, because not only are we saying, we don't want people to use illicit drugs and we don't want people to drink on the job, we also want to talk about off-duty issues and just prescription med issues and all those things that roll into fitness for duty. It just ties in here nicely. For your administrative staff, we want to make sure that they understand their confidentiality requirements, how they are managing, ensuring that the chain of custody forms are held in confidence and that they are stored correctly. Random testing, I think we already talked about this. That 30-day requirement is showing up here again. Just remember to make sure that everybody's in your pool. If you've got new applicants, make sure that they get on the active list, that kind of stuff. The 2018 percentages, while I have not seen this on the FMCSA website, I have been told by third-party administrators that they have documentation that says these numbers are staying for 2018, so 25% and 10%. If in fact any of that would change, we would make sure that Mike sent a bulletin out to all the members, but you can just double check with your TPA. But again, I have a good resource that tells me that's 25 and 10 for 2018. This is the grid that you can actually see on the FMCSA regs that talks about when you should have a DOT post-accident test and when you would have a non-DOT post-accident test. And the only reason I bring this up is I went through an audit with somebody and they actually got cited, although I'm not sure how much of the fine was attributed to this, but they got cited for using the wrong form post-accident. So we're all aware that if there's a human fatality at the scene, that we are drug testing our driver on a DOT form, regardless of whether the driver was cited or not. In other instances, if we have somebody leaving the scene for care, medevac, ambulance, whatever the case may be, or a vehicle is towed and the driver is cited, we're using the DOT form. If the driver is not cited, and by company policy, you want to do a drug test, which you absolutely can, you would be using a non-DOT form, even though they are a commercial driver. And this is what they snagged them on, because they used the wrong form. Frankly, with everything else going on at an accident, I think this is the least of your worries. But I do bring it up just because it was part of a recent audit. When you talk about your company policy post-accident, sometimes you just adopt FMCSA standards, and that is fine and allowable. Sometimes the school district will require you to elevate that, or you, based on your own considerations, decide to elevate that. I've seen examples where they say if there is a student on the bus, regardless of anything else, they're drug testing the driver. I've heard if a police arrives at say then there's no students on the bus, and if the police arrives at the accident, they're drug testing the employee. I've seen where if another human is involved in the accident, so another driver, they're drug testing the employee. And all of those variations are okay, and there's pros and cons against each one of those. My advice to you is that you need to talk about that. You need to decide which one you're doing, and then you need to apply that consistently. So just be mindful of, and there's a cost evaluation of that, things like that. So, but the consistent application is the important piece of a company policy to avoid any questions in regards to discrimination or things like that. Does anybody have any questions about the post-accident drug testing? Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about reasonable suspicion. Everybody hopefully is aware that certain members of your administrative or management team should have reasonable suspicion training, and that they are only those that are trained are allowed to send somebody for a reasonable suspicion test. I will do a little infomercial. I think that this class, certifying people to be authorized to send people for a reasonable suspicion testing, is going to be a workshop at the 2018 Pennsylvania School Bus Conference. So if you don't have a good set of people that are certified, maybe you want to think about that, getting that done over the summer. We often talk about ensuring that there are certain folks who have this authority, and they don't necessarily need to be supervisors or people that are responsible for others, but they need to be people who are on your staff. Like oftentimes I'll see a trainer who is also a reasonable suspicion person, someone in the shop. And, again, if it's a crew leader or a supervisor from the shop. Dispatch, again, these people are the ones that are handing out the keys. Maybe they're responsible to look, the driver in the eye every morning and, make sure that they're looking good. They have the authority. I often talk about the last man standing rule. If you have an operation where, you have all your drivers out, but you have a dispatcher at the end of the day who is there by themselves and they see something, they should have the ability to send somebody for a drug test if need be. So, my advice, so say you go through this process, whether it's reasonable suspicion, random, all these other things, you get a positive drug test. My suggestion is to suspend the employee until the investigation is complete. So obviously I believe everyone is aware that if you send somebody for a reasonable suspicion test, they are not allowed to drive themselves to the test, and they are not allowed to return to work until you have the results of the test. Conversely, you don't want them then to drive themselves home from the test. Obviously, if we believe someone is impaired and we know or should have known that they would be a danger to themselves or others being behind the wheel, we wouldn't want to then allow them to be behind the wheel to go home. So it's a little bit of logistics, but again, the safest and the least risky thing to do is drive them to the test and then drive them home. So I put this slide in there back in over the summer. I would say with our new administration that I will just blow by this slide. If people have questions about this slide and want to talk about that later, we can talk about that later. So I'm going to move on from there. If in fact you have to separate an employee because of a positive drug test, you'd want to make sure that you have your medical review officer confirmation well documented. You are required to provide to them a copy of the test where it shows that they are positive. Under FMCSA rules, you are required to provide them a SAP list, a substance abuse professional list, which they have made very easy for us to do. You go to saplist.com, you put in the employee's zip code, and you spit out 3 or 4 SAP professionals who would be available for that employee to reach out and get help for. I apologize, I skipped the 3rd bullet, which is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. You are relying on a background check, which is a drug test, to make this termination. So you would want to also include the Fair Credit Reporting Act notice, which I believe we gave you. And if I didn't, feel free to email me and I'd be happy to give that to you. The other part of all this is we want to make sure, because again, we want to be humanistic in this process. Some of these folks are really in crisis. So we don't want them losing their job to be so devastating that they leave work and do something terrible to themselves or to others. So when all this is going on, we want to be very professional, very respectful. We want to be supportive of that person. We want to get that person help. We want to be part of that person's safety net. When we talk about, being humanistic and human resources, while yes, they have not complied with our rules and regulations, we don't want to, be the straw that broke the camel's back and God forbid they go home and do something. So again, just, be very mindful. If it makes, and this is always a little crossing of the line, sometimes we get into these situations and we talk about, is there someone at home that you want us to reach out to? Like, I don't do that without their permission. But, sometimes, including the family member, helps them, get home safely and has somebody so that they can talk to somebody during this process. And of course, encourage them to seek help. Okay. Still good, so I'm going to keep going. Record keeping, there's actually a great document that's provided for you from the FMCSA. It's a great checklist, and it just goes down the list of what you need to have in place if you were to be audited. And there is a slide, I think a couple slides coming up where I can actually give you that link. And we've already talked about the majority of these things, making sure you have your policies in place, your training records, all of your random records, your control and custody form. You need to do the same thing for alcohol testing. There is a element in the record keeping that talks about employee return to work, return to duty records. Again, in school bus, we rarely have that as part of our process because we normally don't allow them to come back unless there are extenuating circumstances. this is the document I was talking about. So this is a 60-some page document. The last 2 or 3 pages is a checklist of what record keeping you need to have in place if and when, well, what record keeping you need to have in place, period. If and when you're audited, they're going to come look for those records. And I've been through that, and it's pretty painful if you don't have them. So if you download that and you have questions about what's on that list, or you're not familiar with something that is bulleted on that list, again, feel free to call our office. We'd be happy to answer that question for you. We, at the very beginning of this, talked about the other rules and laws that are part of this process. And again, we spoke about OSHA, which is and the Drug-Free Workplace Act. Again, you're required to provide a healthy work environment. Americans with Disability Act, again, talked about that. Parity Medical Marijuana, Disability Act. So the Americans with Disability Act, which was expanded in 2008, expanded the definition of disability, which made it extremely broad. And I could probably come up with some covered disability for everybody that's on this phone call. So you just want to be really mindful of how that interacts with each event as you're going through it. The Mental Health and Parity Addiction Act. So again, people are having issues, having concerns. They have extra protection under that act. Both of these things, again, if someone is actively using, that is not covered. So that begs the question, the employee came to you and said, I'm having trouble, I need to seek help, I need a leave of absence. So because they were not snagged as part of a suspicion test or a random, and they came to you in advance, some of these pieces they may be able to avail themselves of. If they're actively using and they are found out during a test, these things may or may not be available to them. Usually not. Okay, FMLA. I'm going to leave that slide there. It's in your packet. If anybody has questions about FMLA, call me. So again, many of you may not have 50 or more employees, so you may not need to worry about FMLA. But in its place, you should have a personal leave of absence policy, not just for these events, but for all events, so that, again, you're applying consistently your processes. Pennsylvania medical marijuana. We've already said marijuana is a Schedule I drug according to the federal authorities. So that's where we stand with that. Your state initiatives cannot override that. So again, we just want to make sure that our employees are aware and understand that even if they have a prescription for medical marijuana, they should not be using it if they want to continue to have their commercial license. Again, you may all be very familiar with this, but just as a reminder, in Pennsylvania, we do have Act 139. Again, with the opioid crisis, some instances, those that call 911 to get help for someone will have immunity, even if they themselves are in possession of drugs, or oftentimes they are worried that the person who is in crisis is already on parole, or because they took an illegal drug and they're afraid to call on behalf of that person. But just as a reminder, Act 139, there's immunity. And again, this is a tool to just make sure, again, it may not be relevant to your drivers, but it may be relevant to your drivers' children or people within your community. And again, the more we can get this word out that everybody knows about these things, the better off we will be as a society. Your general policies, whoops, should include, this is a wrap-up slide, I think. Employees, make sure employee confidentialities, make sure everything is clearly communicated. What is the procedures in regards to an investigation? Make sure that there is due process for the employee. Again, this is all good risk management tools, regardless of what the accusations are, whether it's drug and alcohol or it's child abuse, you know, somebody's been accused of child abuse, or whether there's, you know, just general things going on in the office that people are misbehaving. All these things apply. For the fifth bullet point, obviously the control of testing. My recommendation is use third-party tester so that you're not opening yourself up to that piece. And I don't know, again, if anybody on the line has union contracts. There is a interplay oftentimes with what the union protections are and your company policy, so you want to make sure that they are that they coincide with each other. Okay, so if something does happen, again, just, you know, concentrate on the work performance, not the person. Make sure that you document. Again, don't assume that things are going to get better. That is not normally the course of events. Usually things get worse. And obviously follow your state regulations. We are not doctors. We don't need to diagnose people's problems. We don't need to, maybe they're depressed, maybe they're bipolar, maybe. Not up to us to determine that. You know, this don't moralize. You until you've walked the day in somebody else's shoes, you don't know why they're in the position that they're in. You don't know why they've made the decisions they've made. But let's just, you know, once it has happened, let's be there and help them. Don't let them talk you out of it. You know, it's just today. You know, I was just having a bad day. I was just, you know, I'll never let it happen again. And that's highly unlikely unless they're getting help. And this is another one, just make sure, you know, even for our long-term employees or our best friends, again, if we are enabling, we are not helping. We have already gone through this. It's not your responsibility to figure out what their problems are or have all the answers or be the counselor. That's not our role. We are really good at running school bus. We are not certified counselors. So let's get them the help that they need. And or it's not our job to be the police. We're not here to, you know, press criminal charges or, you know, figure out who did what or who has what or all those types of things. That's really left best up to the professionals who are experts in their area. So I'm going to pause a minute and see if anyone has any questions or comments.
It looks like we have. Go ahead, Maggie, you got it.
Yep, so we have one question. What happens and what do you recommend if an employee refuses to go for a drug test when there is reasonable suspicion?
Great question. The rule, again, under FMCSA standards, if someone refuses to take a test, that is considered a positive. So, and then termination, and that would follow them and all those lovely things. So oftentimes, you know, people do kind of get their back up, like, what, are you crazy? I'm not doing drugs. I'm not doing that, And frankly, it could be they're just exhausted or lack of sleep. Lack of sleep has a lot of the same exhibited behaviors and can be as impairing as some drugs. And people get belligerent. And so the interaction should be hopefully a calming, hey, I'm just trying to follow the rules. I don't want you to make a harsh decision. Understand if you decide not to go to this drug test, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be as if it was a positive. We're going to have to record that. We're going to have to report that to a future employer, and we will have to terminate you if that is, in fact, you have a zero tolerance policy. And that's all as required by FMCSA. There is, again, back to the school bus convention this summer. That is actually that's a 2.5-hour workshop, and that is part of the workshop is talking about how to confront people and how to walk them through all the elements so that they can make a decision. And sometimes they, this is BS, I'm not doing it, and they walk out. And unfortunately, they've kind of written their own termination letter at that point. Good question. Any other questions?
There are no other questions at this time, Grace.
Okay, perfect. I'll share some that I've received. So this is our typical day, and I think Katie from my office is also on the line. We get emails, we get calls, anything under the sun. And again, remember, part of your membership benefit through the PSBA is that you have access to RC Kelly Law through the Business Counsel Program. And if you have a question, you can pick up the phone and ask, and we will help you. So this is the email we got on January 9th of last year. Good morning. So-and-so was arrested for a DUI on December 23rd. Her court hearing is at the end of the month. Do we need to stop her from working? So I'm going to ask for a volunteer from the group. What would you do? You may want to be a brave soul and give me an opinion on how you would handle this employee.
Everyone is unmuted, so you can speak up.
I would think you would have to suspend until you get the results.
Correct. So in this instance, she has a DUI under Act 24. One of the enumerated charges is a DUI in the last 5 years, or last 3 years, last 5. We'll look at that. I'll make Kate look that up. Kate, quick look that up while I'm talking. More at issue here is this happened on December 23rd. It's January 9th. I'm sure they went back to school January 2nd or 3rd. And this woman's been driving for a week. So I have a problem. So she should have, again, in your employee policy, you want to make sure that your employees understand that they are required to tell you within 72 hours or before they report for their next shift if they've had an incident with the police, including, obviously, DUIs. Because God forbid the school finds out about this or it shows up in the local paper and you, the employer, does not know yet and you still have this person driving. And one of the moms walks into school and say, do you know that Grace Kelly got a DUI on Saturday night and she's driving my child? So my other fun one is this gentleman who is on Facebook. If you don't recognize this, it's Facebook. He got a job as a school bus driver because here he is enjoying the fact that he's a school bus driver. He is on the school bus. He's up here telling me he's getting up early to be a school bus driver. And then later, he updates his cover photo to be this guy. And I'm really not thinking that's a cigarette. So if you are confronted with this information about one of your employees, how do you think you would handle this one? Or where would you start? But so raise your hand if you would terminate this employee. Do that one. I agree with Jody. This person is not portraying a professional school bus driver who I would want to give my child to. Again, you have to look at this from the eyes of the parents. If they saw this on Facebook, would they want this person driving their child on Monday morning? Probably not. And the other part of this is I know none of you have time to troll Facebook for all of your employees and see what they're doing on Facebook. So this is coming to us from somebody else. Somebody has already seen this and has brought it back to the office. So a lot of what, and I actually use this slide when I'm talking to drivers because, again, they want to, it's my Facebook. I have, First Amendment rights. I can say whatever I want. I can do whatever I want. I'm not at work right now. Absolutely. All those things are true. However, what you do off duty will have consequences to your job as a school bus driver, a school bus attendant, because you're responsible for other people's children. So we like to do social media education for our drivers. So those first two actually came to us through the BCP program. This one was actually just on the news, so I snagged that one, and actually it was 3 years ago now. This driver had a rough day. I'm sure she did. God bless our school bus driver, as I understand it. But she's on the school bus and having a beer and deciding to post that on Facebook. And again, obviously, everybody's up in arms. This one actually shows up on the, Fox News. So again, just a good education for your drivers. Make sure that they are aware of, they are almost like the mayor of the town. Everybody cares what they're doing because they are responsible for the children. So just good education. On that note, Kate's got an answer for us. 3 years for a DUI. So that disallows them. If they've had a DUI in the last 3 years under Act 24, that disallows them from being a school bus driver. So thank you, Katie. That is all I have, unless people have more questions. And I don't know if this is going to work.
I have another question, Grace.
Okay.
Is there training for the drivers on how to recognize drug and alcohol abuse for the students riding the bus?
So great question. That is actually part of local drug and alcohol prevention groups do that. If the question is coming from somebody on the eastern side of Pennsylvania, the first place I would send you is the Center for Humanistic Change. They actually go out and do education like that for teachers and anyone within the school system and just even to the general public to help, again, identify when a child is in danger or a child is using.
I also have a question, Grace.
Sure.
So this is spurred on by the Facebook picture.
Mm-hmm.
So if a driver works for company A, gets pulled for a drug test, doesn't pass it, knows they're not going to pass it. They've already gone to company B, and you come with that. You've got everything, your license, you're ready to go, and they hire them. where does the liability lie? Where does it go back to the company that they're coming from, or the one that they're going to, or sort of both? Because I know of an incident where this happened, and the driver is driving.
So, under, I'm going to pull up the FMCSA. So under FMCSA, we have that previous employer inquiry responsibility. So if you have a ready-to-roll driver who's going to walk, they're walking in with a school bus, a CDL with an S&P endorsement, we are doing the high fives happy dance, right? One of the one of the requirements, and actually I see it's in your handout, it's number 6. One of the requirements is that we do a previous employer inquiry. Let me pull this over and pull that up. Previous employer inquiry as to whether or not that person has ever failed a test or jumped a test.
That's correct. I guess that's where I'm coming from, is how did they get, besides the people being ecstatic that they had a driver coming, obviously someone didn't do this.
Correct. So, and we all understand that this paperwork is a little burdensome, and people argue, well, I don't want you to tell my current employer because I don't want them to know I'm looking. And if I send this, of course, they know that they're out there looking. And what if they don't get the job? And now they've kind of burnt a bridge with their current employer, and because you're out here doing your due diligence as required by law. And this, actually, I've seen, this is one regulation that I see people deciding maybe to do, but maybe to do later in the process. Same thing with the Act 168, with, that previous employer inquiry. People are hesitant to do it because they don't want that driver to be wooed back to the other place. Oh, you're out looking? Hold on, let me sweeten the pot for you. What's making you unhappy? Let me see if I can save you. However, to your point, the flip side of not doing these is somebody's a bad character and you don't know about it because somebody in your operation either didn't fill this out, or, conversely, they didn't ask, the person failed a test at your location, but nobody else has asked about it. And this process is extremely archaic. The proposal on the table is that they would have a federal clearinghouse, so that if you, and in your operation, you have somebody who's a positive, you go online, add that person's name and information, and that they're a positive, and it becomes a centralized clearinghouse. I then, as a new employer, one of my due diligence pieces is to go on to that clearinghouse, type in the person's name, and see if they're eligible to work. And that way, I'm not, that employee is not being outed that they're out looking, and or, all the other pieces of that we already talked about. That's not in place right now. So the only other thing that, again, as a good citizen of the school bus industry, again, we're kind of working in small communities. If you feel so inclined that that person is so unsafe with the children of the community, you could pick up the phone and talk to if it's everybody's working for the same school district, the school district probably knows that this employee was terminated, and then they're showing up over here with somebody else. But you do have to be a little careful and just mindful, make sure that you have good documentation that all these things are true, because you wouldn't want the employee to come back and, claim slander, libel, or whatever, the employee that left. Yeah.
How do we get a copy of the seminar handouts? I didn't get that.
Yep, so the handouts will be emailed to you, Maggie.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. They're also, I guess we didn't put them on our website. Oh yeah, here they are. You can also go to rckelly.com/altered-state.
Okay.
And now I'm going to look at Katie and say, do you think we uploaded this? But either way, we will make sure that they are here at rckelly.com/altered-state. Both the slides and the handouts, like 10 pages of handouts. And Maggie will also email it to all of the participants.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Mike, it's 11:05.
So,
I did it.
You did it. It's great job, Grace. Again, thank you to everybody. Again, you know where to reach Grace, as well as anyone at the PSBA office. But obviously her contact information is there. As we said, this is being recorded, so it will be posted on the website in the members only section. We thank all of you for taking the time to be with us today. Keep watching for additional webinars that will be coming up as we move in here into the new year. So with that, we wish everybody a great day and stay warm and be safe. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.